Quick side note before I get into the book stuff. Do y'all know Addison Rae? The TikToker? Aside from book stuff, I am a pop head, I would say. I love pop music. And like a year ago on TikTok, she was teasing this song, I Got It Bad. And it's a fucking slay the house down boots song. It's so good. Drop the song. Drop the song. And she hasn't released it. And she teased it on TikTok. Like, you can't do that. You can't leave the gays hanging like that. Especially Pride Month. Anyways, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen. And today I'm doing the mid-year book Freakout tag. The classic June staple when the girls need the content. But this is a reflection tag. We're thinking about what we've read so far in the first half of the year. And I'm having a glass of wine. A little different for the channel, but... So getting into the tag questions, the first question is best book you've read so far in 2022. And let me stop you right there because there's no way I'm picking one this early. I don't like talking in singular. I like plural. Let's talk about a couple of books that really have done it for me. I have 5.5. Okay, bear with me. I'll be quick. I'm sorry, everyone. First up, what I think is probably my favorite of the year so far, Miss Sheila Heti. Bangers on bangers on bangers on bangers. So the reason why I picked 2 here is I read Motherhood this year in March, I believe. New instant favorite. Did everything that I want autofiction to do. So smart, so revelatory, philosophical, very thinky, questioning your existence. We love it for an overthinky person like myself. And then also Pure Color I actually read in like September of last year. And it's a book that came out in February this year. And then in 2021, for my top 10 favorite of the year, I did not put this in there because I only wanted to consider 2021 books. But that leaves this one hanging this year. And I'm like, well, I don't know which one I like more because they're both incredibly excellent overall. She's a new favorite writer of mine. I still need to read How Should a Person Be? And so that's coming soon, but I'm kind of saving it because she's a new favorite writer of mine. And I don't want to be out of her fiction that soon. So I'm trying to like savor the Hetis. So I would say if you like philosophical books that are also fiction and her playing with the form that way and just being in the mind of one of, in my opinion, our best thinkers out right now about fiction and about being trapped in our flesh prisons, thinking about, in this book, being a daughter, the father-daughter relationship, so parenthood and dealing with grief, and thinking about the different types of people in the world and how that all plays out through like a love situation as well that's queer. This book has everything. It's very tiny and I love it. This book, if you've ever thought about being a parent, whether you want to be or not, and whether you're very rooted in your choice or not, this book is something that you should absolutely read. I think everyone should read it. I think you can learn something from it and thinking about your own existence. This book just means a ton to me personally. It's a book that I hold really close to my heart. I had to put at the top. Okay, next up, aside from Miss Heti, this is also up there, Trust by Hernan Diaz. This book is in my top 5 because it is a metafictional account that absolutely blew my fucking mind when I tell you. By the time you get to the end of this book, everything you thought about the book beforehand is completely altered and it's just magnificent. So as I said, this is metafictional. It is a book told in 4 different parts. A very brief short description of this book is that it follows this very famous couple that's made a lot of money on Wall Street. The husband seems to be a magician of sorts in terms of making money and being able to read the market and knowing what's coming next. And you follow his wife who has some mystery around her as to a certain illness that she has. The first part of this book is its own standalone novel. And then the other 3 parts sort of make you question what's been told to you in this novel. What is true, what is false, and by the end of it, I promise you, you will be shook. And if you're not, I don't know what to tell you. This book is incredible. I have an individual book review of this if that sounds good to you. I'll link it below. Please read it. And oh my God. Should I announce it here? I'm going to announce it here. Hernan Diaz, he is a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and he's actually coming on the channel. I got an interview with him, so I'm so excited. It's coming in later in July, so keep an eye out for it. Read the book before our discussion. It's going to be fun. So read Trust, y'all. Next up, I have a classic for you. I really did read Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I never, even like picking it up, even like a quarter of the way through it, I did not think I would actually finish this. I was like, I've never read a book this long, especially for it being a classic that's quite, I would say, dense in its prose. I think it really requires a lot of attention. It is very rich, I would say, in vocabulary and sentence structure, many characters, lots of different plots here. But essentially it follows this one town in 1829 called Middlemarch, and we follow a bunch of different characters, and a lot of messy shit happens, and I loved it. I was so surprised by how enthralled I was by this story, just considering like my own preconceptions, I guess, of classics and my own thoughts about what I think about them, but I went into this with an open mind, and I loved it. It is really a book that made me open my eyes to the novelistic form itself. What can one do in a novel, in its telling? What are the limits or constraints of the form, and how can one use it to brilliant effect? I would say George Eliot did this masterfully in this novel. I think if you like drama and juiciness, this is a book you should read. Very high level description of this, but it has marriages, it has wills, it has people fucking each other over in those wills. It has death, it has drama, it has past histories that come unearthed. It has lots of longing for knowledge and for personal development, and characters that I just absolutely love spending time with. And it's really fun reading a book of this length. You really feel like you know these characters. Like Dorothea Brooke, I love her. She is a friend of mine now. This is a really fun read, and I think if you want a classic that is challenging but is absolutely worth the time invested, I can confidently say this is that for me. Incredible on audiobook, narrated by Juliet Stevenson, best in the game. Best audiobook I've ever listened to in my life. So yeah, audio this one too, if you would like. Okay, next up I have a book that I've covered extensively on the channel, but because I had such a fun time with it, I had to. It's Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. This one I feel like is quite divisive on the BookTube. I have a lot of content about this. I interviewed the author, which was incredible, so I'll link that below, and I also had a live discussion for my book club called The Bar and the Book Club, in which I'm joined by another content creator on here to live stream a discussion for an hour, and people that watch it can comment and join the discussion. And so this was one of those as well, and during that discussion it was a little bit more controversial than I thought it would be. Thinking about it now, I can kind of understand why. Essentially, this is a book that's all about the morality of sex and desire as we follow this queer trio, throuple dynamic, and how that plays out. And so this one's all about self-identity within a sort of polyamorous queer dynamic that is very messy and fraught with moral implications for our narrator and her thinking about her place in this dynamic and her trying to find herself through the throuple is so fun to read. When you pick this book up, you cannot put it down. Like, I think that was kind of the consensus, is like everyone like devoured the book, but then had different ideas about the characters and the representations in it and everything. But I think this one is a brainy, very intellectual, and again philosophical reflection on sex, which is really fun for me to read. And I liked, rather than just having like the corporeal bodily experience of sex on the page, really thinking about how it affects one's mind and using sex and relationships as a structure for your life, what that looks like in this dynamic. So fun, adore it. And then last but most certainly not least is my queen, my favorite author, Ottessa Moshfegh, has a new book coming out on Tuesday, June 21st. It is Lapvona, another book I've talked about a lot on the channel. I have my own individual book review of this one as well. If I love a book, I'm going to do a lot of content on it and likely make an individual book review on it, and this is one of those. This book has been getting a lot of odd coverage on the interwebs. I think it has something to do with Ottessa Moshfegh being that bitch, quite frankly, being a quite famous author since the publication of My Year of Rest and Relaxation. She is the moment, and I absolutely love her as well. And so some of the coverage has been odd, and it's fun to kind of see the discourse around her, but it feels very like the Sally Rooney of it all. I'm a little bit tired of some of the takes that I'm seeing, not because people think that the book is bad, but some of the critiques and sort of assumptions about her and her work are kind of creeping into the coverage of this book, and it's really annoying to see. But anyways, let me not get into all that. I will say I absolutely love this in terms of it being new territory for Moshfegh. It's set in a historical setting in this town called Lapvona, and it is sort of Ottessa Moshfegh's COVID response novel. She said this in interviews that she wrote this during the pandemic as a way of escapism and understanding what's going on around her. So this is all about faith and religion, and also how those play against capitalist structures, and how the Lord William in this, who oversees Lapvona, is causing much destruction for the town. And we follow this young disabled boy named Marek who is navigating this, and you see how he ends up getting closer to Lord William and the fallout that ensues. This is another one that when you pick it up, it is so plotty and very intricately constructed, I think, in terms of its characterization and the ways that she merges the different plot lines of each of her characters in a really fun and new way. But I will say this book is incredibly depraved, but it was really fun seeing a favorite writer of mine dabble in something completely new, and while keeping many of her staple characteristics of her work, apply them into a completely new setting was such a flex and so fun for me as an avid reader of her work to see her do that. So read Lapvona, give it a shot. Even if you've read her books before, I think this is a new territory for her, so go into it with an open mind, I would say. I'd like to see more of that. Yeah. God damn it, that was like 10 minutes already. I'm so sorry, everyone. I have to talk about my faves though, okay? Next up is the best sequel that I've read so far in 2022, and I will say I'm currently reading it right now, and this is my June book club pick. It's Either Or by Elif Batuman. This is the sequel to The Idiot, and I think it's the only sequel that I've read so far this year, so while this question asks for the best, it's the only one I've read, so it's the only one I can really answer. But I will say I am absolutely loving it, even way much more than The Idiot, so I'm very, very pleased with my experience with this. I will save my thoughts on Celine's second year at Harvard for our live discussion with Alex from A Page 31, who is a Batuman stan, and I'm really excited to talk to him for the first time, like live. It's going to be super fun. I followed him for a long time before starting booktubing, and so I'm really excited to have that conversation and talk about this one. It's very intellectual and also self-reflective. Celine as a narrator is so fun to be in the mind of, as she takes a very often literal perspective on things and thinking about how she wants to structure her life. This book is all about the decision to decide between an aesthetic or ethical life as she reads Soren Kierkegaard's Either Or, and how it makes her question many things in her life, namely the relationship that ended in the first book, how it kind of boils over into this one, and her thinking about what Yvonne did to her in her first year as a fuckboy, and her kind of coming to those realizations. So anyways, we'll discuss this at the end of the month, June 28th, 5 p.m. Pacific time. If you can't catch it, it'll still be saved on the channel, but just wanted to let you know. Okay, so new release you haven't read yet but want to. Post-Traumatic by Chantal V. Johnson. This is an arc that I've had for a while, and I've been meaning to get to it. It's constantly at the top of my TBR, and then I didn't get to it yet, but I'm going to very soon, likely this month or next. This one is essentially a depressed woman moving through the world novel, but this one follows a Black Latinx lawyer who is living in New York, and she represents mentally ill patients at a psychiatric hospital. And this is all about her reckoning with a past trauma in her life as an adult and as a lawyer, and how those two things sort of play together for her and her identity. And I listened to an interview with her, and she talks about how an essay that I've been really intrigued by that came out earlier this year called The Trauma Plot, or I think it's called The Case of the Trauma Plot by Parul Sehgal in The New Yorker, has caused quite a buzz for me in my reading and thinking about this idea of what trauma in fiction is doing in the contemporary literature. And in the interview, she talks about how this book sort of subverts the criticisms that Parul Sehgal has in that piece. And so I'm very excited to see how she tackles trauma in fiction. And yeah, so I'll let you know what I think of it, but I'm very excited. And I'm hoping I can get her on the channel too, because I want to talk about lawyer stuff and trauma. So fingers crossed. Okay, so most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I don't know if this is my definitive answer, but it's a book that I'm very eager to read. It is Bliss Montage by Ling Ma. I actually have not read Severance. I feel like I'm one of the few on here that has not read Severance. I think I'm going to read it before this book comes out in, I think, September, but it's a collection of short stories from Ling Ma. And I guess she sort of plays in Bliss Montage with, I think, dystopian or surrealist or just weird short stories. And I'm a huge fan of short stories. Just from some of the buzz that I've seen for it and some of the descriptions of the stories that I've read sound really intriguing. And I always think it's fun to see an author follow up a immensely successful book and use a new form or something, and just seeing how they can, kind of respond to the immense praise. For example, Sally Rooney, Ottessa Moshfegh. I think it's going to be fun to see where that lands, even though I haven't read the first book, but I will. So anyways, that one sounds really fun. So that's one that I'm really looking forward to. Okay, next up I have the biggest surprise of the year so far. And this one is a book that I'm not going to say that I recommend, or just the most immense trigger warnings I could ever give for a book, I think, ever. So just you've been warned, okay? It's The Sluts by Dennis Cooper. This is a book that came out in 2004, and I'm not going to give you full thoughts on this. I'm going to talk about it in my June wrap-up. I was going to do an individual book review for it because it's a new favorite of mine, but this one is an internet novel set in the very early 2000s, and essentially it tells the story of a young escort named Brad, and the book is constructed as a bunch of different reviews on this escort website in which reviews are made of this escort, and he becomes sort of like internet famous for these various telling about these men's experience with him sexually, and it becomes increasingly more depraved and violent. But what's so interesting about this book is it's all about the sort of idea of fact versus fiction on the internet, and giving people the power to say whatever they want on the internet, how that can sort of bleed into reality, and thinking about how the power of internet drama and gossip can kind of boil over into something even more substantial. But I will say this book, again, is incredibly bleak, incredibly depraved. When I first picked this up, I read like half of it right away, and I sort of put it down for a little bit because I felt like I was going to have a panic attack a little bit, just because it's an onslaught of just like violence and depravity. It was a lot, but I will say this book is truly magnificent and just so intelligent and brilliant that it completely surprised me. Like, I knew it was going to have depravity in it from what I've seen about this book. People say it's very fucked up, and so I was expecting that, but I didn't expect it to be that fucked up, but I also didn't expect it to be as smart as it is in what it's saying about the internet, and using this idea of fact versus fiction, and keeping all of these various puzzle pieces in this novel together in a way that feels so controlled, even though this book is completely chaotic. Yeah, this is a good one, but warning. Okay, favorite new author, debut, or new to me. So as I mentioned previously, Sheila Heti, She Is That Girl. New to me sort of this year, but like the second book I read from her really cemented that for me. And then second, a debut author that is a new favorite of mine is Paul Dalla Rosa. He is an absolutely incredible short story writer, and I read his debut collection that just came out in the UK and Australia this month. So this is out now. You can buy it if you're in the US from Blackwell's. Highly recommend it. It's currently my favorite collection of the year so far, but it really is looking at a bunch of often queer young men trying to seek something more out of their life, trying to seek an exciting and vivid inner life despite living in capitalism and being queer, and the various struggles that come with both of those things. And I love his tone and the way he used very dark comedy throughout his stories to a magnificent effect. I will say his stories remind me a lot of, again, Ottessa Moshfegh, but also like Emma Cline, I think, is very similar to him. I just love reading a queer voice in that form. I feel like it's rare for me to find an author that speaks to me as much as this one did. Very akin to those other writers. So yeah, I highly recommend this if you're looking for short stories that are queer, that are dark, about people searching for more, lots of queer longing, and that are also very darkly comedic. This is your book for sure. Okay, completely switching gears. Completely switching gears. Newest fictional crush. For this one, so I read a romance, y'all. I know. Who am I? I read Emily Henry's Book Lovers this month. So I have not talked about this on the channel yet. But this month I wanted to sort of test my, assumptions about things. I tend to think that I don't like romance or like commercial fiction at all. But I was like, why though? Like, why do I think I don't like it? Like, why do I tend to lean towards literary fiction? What does that mean? I love questioning my own like assumptions as a reader, and so I wanted to read a romance, and this one seemed to be sort of on the verge of like being borderline literary fiction, but also being very much like a romance novel. I saw some faves of mine really loved this book. People that read a lot of books that are similar to me, they still loved this as like a traditional romance, and so I was like, you know what? Let me see what Miss Emily Henry's all about. And she kind of got me. She got me a little bit, not fully, but she kind of ate. She ate a little bit. It was a nibble. It was a nibble. Mr. Charlie Lastra. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. This, in short, is like a romance between two people working in publishing. I hope to one day work in publishing, and so that was a fun, I love books about books that kind of consider the form, and I just love reading about my favorite thing in the world, which is books, so I love that. And this book has bookstores, people that work in publishing, and a romance that ensues between two people that don't initially think that they like each other. And it's also very aware of romance tropes and sort of highlights them, and is very aware of what they are, but also sort of falls into it a bit as well, which I didn't completely love, but I appreciated her trying to do that as well. But Mr. Charlie Lastra, he is an absolute delight to read. I was crushing on him hard. So that was really fun for me to like find a character that I was like, okay, what is this making me feel things? Okay. I didn't completely love the experience because I did it on audio and I thought the narration wasn't my favorite. And I think for romance, I think with narrators performing it, it kind of comes across even more like twee than the book even intends it to. So I think I'm going to read Beach Read by her next in print, and I'm going to see if it's a different experience. And that book is a romance between two writers, one who writes romance and one who is trying to write the great American novel, and he's a literary fiction writer, and they have to like swap manuscripts or something, and they both try writing each other's style. And I'm hoping that it really plays in this idea of like romance versus literary fiction and like the assumptions that come with that. So we'll see if that one pays off too, but I kind of like this. She kind of ate, so yeah. Next question is a book that made you cry. For this one, I have to pick The Swimmers by Julie Otsuka. This is a book that I think I did cry. And it could have made it into my top 5. Like, it could probably take a spot up there. I really, really loved it. It is essentially this look at, it's sort of like a 2-part novel that kind of switches a little bit by the end of it. Think maybe like Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This, very similar in style, I would say. The first book is this sort of like societal critique to like a response to crisis, i.e. COVID, and the way people panic about certain things, and her looking at that through a bunch of swimmers that go to this recreational swimming pool, and then a crack forms in the bottom of the pool, and how they all start freaking out about what the crack could mean. Very, very funny and very smart. And then the second half focuses on one of those swimmers. Her name is Alice, and she is a woman who is suffering from Alzheimer's. And that section looks at a mother-daughter relationship and this idea of how Alzheimer's affects a family. And it was so absolutely moving, and it really gets you, considering the first half isn't really sad at all. It really sort of like got me by the end of it, and I highly recommend it. It's so good. Please read it. Next up is a book that made me happy. It's another book I read this month. It is Just by Looking at Him by Ryan O'Connell. You might know Ryan O'Connell from the Netflix show Special. He was the star on that show, and this is his first novel. And I absolutely had a blast with it. It follows a young 30-year-old who is in a relationship and he ends up cheating on his partner. And the book is all about him thinking about what he wants. As a queer, disabled man in his 30s who's been in a long-term relationship and has a problematic relationship to alcohol, and how those things play out for him and him discovering himself. I will say this book is so funny, so heartwarming, sad at times. It has like the full gamut of emotions. But I think if you like Melissa Broder and her very like brief chapters that are both funny and a little sad and good plotting, very similar vibes here. So yeah, that book was a blast to read. I adored it so much. He's a really strong writer as well. And it's great on audio as well. So I highly recommend it if you're looking for an audiobook. Okay, next question is most beautiful book you bought so far this year or received. And I was trying to think of what books I've acquired this year. And these are just 2 covers that I really, really like that kind of speak to each other actually. But the first one is The Novelist by Jordan Castro. This cover is perfect, and like if I published a book, like a work of fiction, this is like what I would want my book to be called and what it would look like. So yeah, this is just stunning. I love the cream color. I love the type. I love this idea of a computer in the wood. This book is all about a writer trying to write the piece of autofiction that you're reading, and it's such a blast and funny, and yeah, so I love this cover. And also, I just bought this book called Exalted by Anna Dorn, and I think it's about, I don't remember. It's about like this woman that runs an astrology account on Instagram, but I think it's another like depressed woman moving style novel that I'm really excited for, but I just think this is a really cool and striking cover that caught my eye and made me buy it, and that's a good sign for book cover. Okay, and finally, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I picked 3. I have an expansive TBR, but these are 3 books that I'm pretty sure I'm going to read this year. First one is a classic. As I mentioned, since I read Middlemarch, I really want to read more classics, and I'm now unafraid of conquering huge tomes. And so the next big book I want to read is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. One of my favorite writers, Brandon Taylor, was recently talking about how he thinks this is a perfect novel, and I'm like, you know what? Sold. I don't know too much about it. I know about like a train and a death or something, but aside from that, don't know too much about it. So I'm very excited to try this out, and I hope it's another Middlemarch-esque experience for me. Next, a new absolute favorite writer of mine as well is Jonathan Franzen, and I've read Crossroads and The Corrections by him, and I want to dabble into more of his older work and eventually read his full fiction catalog. And this one, my bestie on here, Hannah May, she's halfway through it, and so I'm going to read it with her and join in on the discussion with her about this one. And I'm hoping that his other novels hold up to other two, because instant new favorite writer for me. So good at family drama. Like, he's just a master of the form. So excited for this as well. Finally, I just got this arc that sounds absolutely incredible. It's called Solito by Javier Zamora. This is a memoir that follows a young poet as he tells the unforgettable story of his harrowing migration from El Salvador to the United States at the age of 9 in this moving, page-turning memoir. I'd like to read books that are written by poets in a new form, and so I think this is going to be really interesting to see. I haven't read Javier Zamora's other work at all, but read some early buzz of this one, and it's going to be very moving and very unputdownable, I think, based on the story that's being told here. So this one comes out in September. Really excited for it. And that about does it for the mid-year Freakout tag. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was really fun reflecting on the first half of the year. And of course, I would love to know, what's the best book you read so far this year? What's your least favorite? Please let me know down below. And I'm always looking for recommendations. If you've seen any of the books featured here and you have a recommendation for me, I am all ears, so please let me know. But anyways, I will catch you all in the next one. Cheers.